She had chosen the lunch hour because it was the window most likely to be unobserved. Not empty. The office was never entirely empty during business hours, but unobserved in the specific sense she needed, which was that the people present were focused on their own lunch, and not on the woman who had slipped into the restroom near the copy room with her personal phone rather than her work phone, which were two different devices she had maintained with some care since starting this job 2 years ago. She stood at the sink and ran the tap, not because she needed water, but because the sound was useful, and she opened her contacts to the number labeled with an initial only, and she called. The clinic's scheduling line answered on the 3rd ring, which was faster than she had expected, and she had her information ready: her name, her date of birth, her insurance, and the type of appointment she needed, which she stated in the careful neutral voice she used for professional calls, which was not her natural voice but which she had developed over time until it had become nearly automatic. Friday was available, which was what she needed. Friday was the day Cael Voss had a full-day video conference with the Singapore office, a recurring commitment that required his presence from 6 in the morning until well past noon, and occupied his attention sufficiently that he rarely needed her for anything except to forward messages and confirm that the coffee was running. Friday was the day she had planned around for 3 weeks, ever since the test that she had taken on a Thursday evening and had stood in the bathroom of her apartment, looking at for a long time before she allowed herself to think about what it meant. She confirmed the appointment. She thanked the person on the line. She hung up and stood at the sink for a moment with the water still running and looked at her reflection in the mirror, which showed her a face she was familiar with and which was, at the moment, not showing anything in particular, which was what she needed it to show when she walked back out into the office. She was good at not showing anything in particular. She had been practicing this skill for most of her professional life and had found it useful in many contexts, and the context she was currently in was one in which it was more useful than usual, because the thing she was not showing was the kind of thing that, once visible, could not be made invisible again. She turned off the tap. She looked at her reflection for another moment and arranged her expression into the expression of a person returning from a routine break, which required no particular quality of attention and which was the expression she wore for most of the day, and she opened the door. Cael Voss was standing in the corridor. He was looking at his phone, which he often was, and he was standing in the particular way he stood when he was between one thing and the next, which was with his weight slightly forward and his attention on the device in his hand, and a general quality of forward motion that was temporarily paused rather than at rest. She had learned to read his postures over 2 years the way you learn to read weather, not because she studied them deliberately, but because proximity and attention had built the knowledge gradually until it was simply available. He said, without looking up,
"Your appointment on Friday has been moved. Dr. Reyes has a family emergency. The clinic will contact you to reschedule."
He said it in the same register he used for schedule updates, which was the register of practical information being passed along, and he did not look up from his phone until after he had said it, and then he looked up and she was standing in the corridor doorway looking at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. The moment was not long. It had the specific quality of a pause that contained information, the kind of pause that occurred when one party in an exchange had said more than they intended to say, and both parties were aware of this, and neither party was yet certain what to do about it.
"Thank you for letting me know."
Her voice was level. She was grateful for the years she had spent developing levelness as a default quality of her voice, because at this moment levelness was the only thing she had that was not actively useful to her situation. She said nothing further.
"Is everything all right?"
The question was a question that could be asked about any appointment at any clinic, and she could not determine from his expression whether it was that question or another one, because his expression was the expression he wore when he was waiting for information and had not yet received enough of it to form a response.
"Yes, thank you."
She walked to her desk. She spent the rest of the afternoon doing her job, which was the activity she was best at in the sense that it was the activity she had most thoroughly mapped and for which she had the clearest set of competencies, and which occupied enough of her attention that the part of her attention which was not on her job could work on other things in the background without being visible. She updated the calendar for the following week. She prepared the summary document for the Thursday board call. She confirmed 3 vendor deliveries. She drafted 2 correspondence items for Cael's signature and left them on the corner of his desk when he was on a call, which was the standard procedure and which required no interaction, which was what she needed. At 5:30, she said goodnight to the woman at the reception desk and took the elevator to the lobby and walked to the subway and rode 2 stops to her apartment and changed out of her work clothes and sat at the kitchen table and wrote a list on a piece of paper. The list had a heading she wrote and then crossed out and wrote again, "How does he know?" Below the heading, she wrote every possible explanation she could construct. The clinic had contacted the office by mistake, using the number on her employee file rather than the personal number she had given them. One of the other administrative staff had seen something on a shared calendar. There had been a data error of some kind in one of the systems she had not fully mapped. She wrote these down and looked at them. Then she wrote, at the bottom of the list, the explanation she had been avoiding since she stepped out of the restroom and found him in the corridor. He had known already, before she made the appointment. She looked at that line for a long time. She thought about what it would mean if it were true, and she thought about what it would mean if it were not true, and she thought about the specific quality of his expression when he said the words, which had been the expression of a person delivering information, not the expression of a person discovering that they had said something they should not have said. She remembered something, then, that she had not thought about in some time. A conversation from before she had taken this job, in an office that was not this office, with a man who was not Cael. Ethan Voss had told her many things in the meeting that had preceded her employment, which had not been an interview in any ordinary sense, but a conversation in which the terms had been described and she had been given time to decide. And one of the things Ethan had told her about his son was this: he sees more than he lets on, more than even I see, sometimes. He simply does not always choose to say what he sees, because he is waiting to understand what he is looking at first. She had thought about this at various points over the past 2 years, but not recently, and she thought about it now, at the kitchen table, and looked at the last line on her list, and thought, if he has been waiting to understand what he is looking at, then the question is, how long he has been looking. She arrived at 7 the following morning, which was earlier than her usual 7:40, and Cael was already at his desk. This was unusual. Cael was many things before 8 in the morning, present in the sense of having responded to overnight correspondence, present in the sense of having reviewed whatever material had arrived while he was not in the office, but physically present at his desk in the building before 7:30 on a Wednesday was unusual enough that she registered it when she stepped off the elevator and saw the light on in his office. She put her bag at her desk and put her coffee down and did not go to his office to ask if he needed anything, because she had learned in 2 years that the kind of presence he maintained in the early morning was a solitary kind, not a kind that wanted checking in on. She logged into her workstation and began the day's first task, which was the overnight message queue, and she worked through it with the efficiency she applied to everything first thing in the morning when her attention was at its best and the office was not yet producing the interruptions that accumulated as the day progressed. She processed 14 items. She transferred 6 to the calendar. She drafted responses to 3 that required responses and flagged them for his review. She was doing all of this while simultaneously occupying the part of her mind that was not doing this with the question she had been occupying it with since the previous evening, which was the question of the list and the last line on the list, and what it meant that the last line was the one she could not explain away. At 9:15 he appeared in the doorway of his office, which was the signal that he was ready for the morning briefing, and she gathered the relevant materials and went in, and they did the briefing in the way they always did it, which was efficiently and with a minimum of conversational filler, because both of them had learned early that the briefings worked best when they were what they were supposed to be, rather than an occasion for the social performance that the word briefing sometimes implied. He asked the questions he needed to ask. She provided the information she had. He made 3 decisions. She noted them. The briefing was finished in 11 minutes, which was average, and in none of it did he refer to anything that had happened in the corridor the previous afternoon, and she was watching for it, which she would not have admitted if asked, but which was true. She was watching for it, and it did not come, and the absence of it was information, but she was not yet certain what information it was. She went back to her desk and continued working, and at 11:45, when she stood up to go to the kitchen for water, she looked across the office at his closed door and thought, "He is being careful." Not careful in the way of a person managing a delicate situation, which would have been visible as a specific kind of attention. Careful in the way of a person who had decided not to do something and was maintaining that decision consistently. He was maintaining the decision not to bring it up. He was giving her the same morning she would have had if yesterday had not happened, or at least a morning that looked like the morning she would have had, which was not the same thing but which served the same function, which was to not require her to respond to it until she was ready. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her water glass and thought about that, and thought about what it said about a person that they would do that. Not nothing. It said something, and the something was the kind of thing she had been careful not to assign too much meaning to over 2 years, because assigning meaning led to expectations, and expectations led to the kind of vulnerability she had spent considerable energy avoiding. She went back to her desk. At 2 in the afternoon, he called her into his office for a logistics problem involving a contract delivery that had been misrouted, and they worked on it together for 40 minutes, shoulder to shoulder at the desk in the way they sometimes did when both of them needed to look at the same thing at the same time. And in those 40 minutes, she observed him, and what she observed was a man who was not performing anything in her direction, not careful or attentive or managing, just working, and the working was the same working it had always been, which was focused and fast, and occasionally requiring him to think out loud in ways that made it clear he was not performing the thinking either. And she thought, "He is not using this time to watch me. He is just doing the work." And then she thought, "But he is also being careful to just do the work, and the carefulness is the thing." She said, when the logistics problem was resolved and she was closing the folder,
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
How did you know about the appointment?
He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that preceded a decision rather than an answer. Then he said,
Security monitoring flagged a pattern in your schedule. I saw the clinic name in the report.
And you read the full report.
No.
But you know what kind of clinic it is.
Yes.
And you did not say anything.
No.
Why not?
Because it is not mine to say.
She looked at him for a moment longer, and then she looked at the folder in her hands, and she thought about the last line on the list from the previous evening, and she thought about Ethan Voss's description of his son. He is waiting to understand what he is looking at, and she thought, he has been looking, and he is still waiting, and the waiting is the kindness of it, the specific kindness of a man who understands that some things need to be said by the person to whom they belong before anyone else is entitled to say them.
Thank you.
You do not need to thank me for that.
I know. I am doing it anyway.
She went back to her desk. He went back to his screen. The afternoon continued in the way afternoons continued when something had shifted in the room but nothing in the room had been changed. She went home that evening and sat at the kitchen table again and looked at the list, which was still on the table from the previous evening, and she crossed out the first 3 items, which were the explanations that were not the right explanation, and she looked at the last line, which was the right explanation, and she thought, he knows. He has known for some period of time. He is waiting for me. She looked at the last line for a long time, and then she wrote, underneath it, a question she had not asked herself in the 2 years she had worked for Cael Voss. What do I want to do about that? The question was different from all the other questions she had been asking because all the other questions had been about him, about what he knew and why he had not said it and what it meant, and this question was about her, and it was the hardest question on the list. 2 days passed in the space between having asked the question and being ready to answer it. She was good at this kind of waiting, at sitting with an unresolved question without forcing a resolution, which was a skill that had developed from the same place as the levelness and the invisibility, which was the understanding that the world did not generally wait for her to be ready, and that her readiness was therefore something she had to make happen internally rather than externally. She made it happen over 2 days of ordinary work and 2 evenings at the kitchen table with the list, which she had added to and subtracted from, and finally folded in half and put in the drawer beside the silverware, not because she was done with it, but because the table needed to be a table again. The envelope arrived on the Friday that was supposed to be the appointment that had been moved. It came in the morning post, which Lena sorted as part of her standard routine, and it was addressed to her by name, which was unusual since personal mail was generally not directed to the office, and the return address was a law firm she did not recognize. She set it aside until the mid-morning slow period, and then opened it at her desk with the envelope opener she kept in the second drawer, and inside was a letter written on the law firm's letterhead, and beneath the firm's header was a handwritten note, 3 pages long. On paper she recognized immediately the cream-colored stationery that Ethan Voss had used for everything personal, the paper that had appeared on his desk in the years she had known him, and that she had associated so completely with him that seeing it now, in a legal envelope addressed to her at the office where she worked for his son, produced something in her chest that she was not prepared for, and that she allowed herself to feel for exactly the time it took to read the cover letter from the law firm, which said that the enclosed document was being delivered according to the terms of Ethan Voss's estate directive, triggered by a qualifying personal life event as defined within the estate parameters. She put down the cover letter. She picked up the handwritten note. She read it. It said what she had known, partly, and what she had not known, partly. It said that Ethan had arranged her placement with the company not through the normal recruiting process, but through a conversation he had had with a colleague who had managed employment transitions, and that the reason he had arranged it was that he had come to believe, in the final year of his life, that Cael was the kind of person who would not recognize what was important to him until it was not available, which was a pattern Ethan had seen in himself and had tried, unsuccessfully, to correct, and which he did not want his son to repeat. He wrote that he had thought, after meeting Lena on several occasions in the capacity she had served before this position, that she was the kind of person whose quality might not be immediately visible in the way that some qualities were immediately visible, and that this made it important to provide the circumstance in which her quality had the opportunity to become apparent over time. He wrote that he was sorry for not having asked her first, for having made an arrangement that involved her without her knowledge or consent, and that he understood if she was angry. He said that she owed him nothing for the arrangement, that she was free to leave whenever she chose, and that if she had come to care for Cael and was allowing the existence of the arrangement to make her doubt that caring, he wanted to say directly, the arrangement was a circumstance, not a cause, and what developed within it was real regardless of how the circumstance began. He closed by saying that if she was reading this letter, something in her life had changed, and he hoped it was something she wanted rather than something that had happened to her, and that whichever it was, he wished her well, and he signed it with his first name, which was how he had always signed things to her. She sat at her desk for a long time after she finished reading. She was aware that the office was continuing around her, that there were sounds of phones and printers and the distant conversation of 2 colleagues near the coffee station, and she was aware of all of this as background rather than foreground, because what was foreground was the letter in her hand and the specific quality of having just read something that had been addressed to her from a person who was no longer alive, which contained information she had needed and not known she needed, and which had arrived at a time that was not a coincidence. She went to Cael's office. She knocked, which she rarely did when the door was open, and he looked up from the screen, and his expression adjusted to the expression he used when he was receiving rather than transmitting, which was open in a careful way.
Something came in the mail this morning. You should read it. It is from your father.
She set the envelope on his desk.
It is about me, and about why I am here.
She looked at him, and he looked at the envelope, and she said,
I will be at my desk.
And she went back to her desk and sat down and found something to work on, and worked on it. She heard him moving in his office. She heard the sound of paper, which was the letter being removed from the envelope. She did not hear anything further for a long time, and the not hearing was not nothing. It was the sound of someone reading something with the full weight of their attention, which was what Cael brought to things that required it. At some point, the sounds of the office reasserted themselves. The phone rang and she answered it and handled the call and transferred it appropriately. and the coffee station conversation concluded, and the morning moved forward in its ordinary way. And then Cael was in his office doorway looking at her, and his expression was the expression she had not seen before, or had seen only in approximation, which was not the controlled expression or the assessing expression, or the expression of someone waiting for information. It was the expression of someone who had received something from a person they had lost and had not known it was coming and had not yet decided what to do with it.
How long have you known about this?
He told me before I accepted the position. It was part of why I was careful about accepting it. I wanted to be certain I was staying for the right reasons.
And are you?
Yes, that is what I have spent 2 years being certain of.
Then what made you certain?
She looked at him across the office that had been the context of 2 years of becoming certain, and she said,
I will tell you tonight if you have time.
I will have time.
He went back into his office. She went back to her work. The letter was between them now, in the way that true things were between people, present in the room even when neither of them was looking directly at it, and she thought, this is the beginning of a conversation we have needed to have, and the fact that it took his father writing a letter to start it is something we will both have to decide what to do with, and we will decide that later. And for now, what matters is that it has started. He was in his office at 6 when the last of the staff left, and she was at her desk at 6 when the last of the staff left, and the office settled into the quiet that it settled into after hours, which was a different kind of quiet from the business hours quiet, less managed and more actual. She could hear him on a call that ended at 6:15, and then the sounds of someone closing out a working session, files being organized or screens being closed, the small sounds of a day being put to bed. At 6:20 he appeared in the doorway of his office and said,
Are you ready?
Yes.
She picked up the folder she had not opened since 3 o'clock and carried it with her as a thing to hold, not as a thing to use, and she went into his office and sat in the chair across from his desk, which was the chair she always sat in, and which she was glad for, because the familiarity of it helped. He sat. He did not sit behind the desk, which she registered. He pulled the second chair, the one that was usually used for when a third person was present, and placed it not across from her but at an angle, which was the angle at which two people sat when they were not across from each other but not side by side either, which was the angle of a conversation rather than a meeting. She registered this too, because she had been in this office many times, and he had never done this before.
You said you would tell me what made you certain about staying.
Yes.
Tell me.
When I accepted the position, I told myself I would stay for a year, 1 year, and at the end of it I would evaluate whether the arrangement had compromised the work in any way, whether knowing the reason I was placed here had made it impossible to do the job on its own terms. It had not, at the end of the year. The work was the work.
And after the year,
I told myself I would stay because the work was good and the work was mine regardless of who arranged the circumstance. That was true. It is still true.
and 14 months in,
I stopped telling myself anything.
He looked at her.
I just stayed.
He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when something had arrived that required its own time rather than a response. She watched his face and saw him working with it, and she thought, this is the thing I have seen 14 months of. This specific quality of a man doing the work of understanding something, and it is not the same as managing something, and the difference is important to me in a way I have not said out loud before.
I am angry at my father.
I know.
Not because he arranged it, because he saw something I should have seen and did not, and he chose to work around my blindness instead of pointing at it.
He thought you needed to find it yourself.
He was probably right.
Yes, probably.
He was quiet again. Then he said,
He was right about you. He told me, in the year before he died, that there were people in the world whose quality was not visible at first impression, and that I had a habit of not looking past first impressions, and I understood at the time that he was making a general point, and now I understand he was making a specific one.
He was very indirect about specific things.
Yes, he was.
The room held a moment of something that was shared and private at the same time. The specific territory of two people both missing the same person. His phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed in the way it changed when something required his attention whether or not the timing was convenient.
I need to take this. It will not be long.
Take it.
He stood and moved toward the window, and she heard the conversation, which was not for her to hear but which was present because the room was a room and there were only two people in it. The person on the other end was named Nathaniel, and the conversation was short, and when Cael turned back around, his expression had the quality of a man who had just processed something that he did not want to spend more time processing than was necessary.
Crane is aware of the appointment.
How?
He has a contact in the security review system who passes information. He used the information to suggest that there are personal complications in my orbit that create vulnerability.
She held this for a moment.
He is using it as leverage.
He is attempting to.
And
he has misunderstood the effect.
what is the effect?
Crane is no longer in a position I require him to fill. I will handle that in the morning.
You are removing him.
I am removing him.
Because of this.
Because of the pattern of which this is the most recent example. This is simply the one that clarified it.
She looked at him and thought, this is what it looks like when someone does not use what is important to them as a variable in a calculation, and she thought, I have never seen this from him in the direction of me before, and it is the most significant thing that has happened tonight.
All right.
All right.
He sat back down.
The other thing.
He looked at her.
The appointment. Why I made it.
She had rehearsed this many times, and she had decided that rehearsed was worse than direct, and she was going to be direct.
I am pregnant. 4 weeks. I found out 3 weeks ago, and I have been deciding what to do about telling you. And every time I decided I was going to tell you, I also decided I was not ready yet. And I think the reason I was not ready was that I was afraid of what you would do about it.
He was very still.
I was afraid you would handle it, the way you handle things, efficiently and without asking what I wanted.
What do you want?
I want to keep it. I have wanted that since the night I took the test and sat in the bathroom and thought about it for a long time. I want to have this child. And I needed to decide that before anyone else decided it for me, because decisions that belong to me are the ones I have spent my whole life not being given, and this one is mine, and I decided it, and I am telling you now.
He was quiet for longer than she expected. She watched his face, and she watched him not performing any response, and she watched him doing something that was harder than performing, which was actually receiving what she had said.
I am glad you told me. Not because I would have decided differently than you did, but because it matters to me that you wanted to tell me, that you chose to.
She looked at him across the office in the angle of a conversation, not a meeting, and she thought, the arrangement was a circumstance, not a cause, and Ethan Voss was right about that, and what is in this room tonight is real, and I know that now. A week passed, and the week was different from the weeks before it, not in any way that would have been visible to the people who worked in the office around them, who noticed nothing unusual, who saw the same two people doing the same work in the same space with the same efficiency they had always done it. The difference was not in the work. The difference was in the specific quality of the air between them when the work was not requiring anything, the small moments when neither of them had a task, and the absence of a task was not filled with the managed distance they had both been maintaining. She could not have named the change precisely if she had tried, but she would have said, it is less careful. We are less careful with each other. And by careful she meant the specific kind of careful that was not consideration but caution, and the loss of the caution was, she found, not frightening in the way she had expected it to be. He handled Crane on Monday morning, efficiently and without elaboration, which was how he handled most things, and she did not ask about the specifics because she did not need them and because some information belonged to the work and some belonged elsewhere, and she had always been good at knowing the difference. She knew Crane was gone from the position he had held, and she knew the reason, and the reason was the thing she carried with her through the Monday and the Tuesday and the Wednesday, not as a burden but as a fact she was still understanding the dimensions of. He had removed someone from a significant position because that person had tried to use her as a pressure point, and he had done it without making it a favor or a statement or a thing that required her response. He had done it because it was the correct thing to do given the information, and the information happened to be about her, and the correction happened to benefit her, and neither of those things made it transactional because the decision had not been about the transaction. She thought about this in the way she thought about things that required time to understand, which was not continuously but in the background of other things, returning to it when the other things left space. The appointment was rescheduled for Thursday. She had been notified by the clinic and had put it in the calendar on her personal phone and had not done anything further about it. On Thursday morning, she arrived at the office at her usual time, and Cael was already there, which was less unusual now than it had been, and she put her bag at her desk and her coffee down and began the message queue. At 8:45, she stood and put on her coat and picked up her bag and said,
I have an appointment at 9. I will be back by 10:30.
I know.
The Singapore call is at 11. I will have the materials ready before then.
I know that too.
All right.
and went to the elevator, and the elevator opened, and she pressed the lobby button, and the doors closed, and she stood in the elevator and looked at the floor number descending and thought about what it meant to be going to this appointment now versus what it had meant 3 weeks ago when she had been going to hide it and had been prevented from doing so by a corridor and a sentence she had not expected. The difference was considerable. The clinic was a 12-minute walk. She had walked it before, when she had gone for the initial consultation the week after the test, which she had done in the window of a lunch hour at the previous appointment, and which she had returned from in time to meet a 3 o'clock call, having told no one and carrying the information the way she had been carrying everything for 2 years, alone and internally, and with the complete absence of evidence on her face. She walked the 12 minutes in the November morning, and the city did what the city did in November, which was to be cold without being dramatic about it. And she was thinking about the walk and the appointment and the particular texture of going to something alone versus the alternatives, when she arrived at the clinic entrance and pushed through the glass door, and there was Cael Voss sitting in the waiting room. He had not been invited. He had not asked. He was simply there, in one of the waiting room chairs, not reading anything, not looking at his phone, looking at the door, which meant he had known approximately when she would arrive and had been watching for her. She stopped walking inside the door and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the expression on his face was the expression of a person who had made a decision and was prepared to defend it if it required defending, and was also, clearly, not certain it would be received well. She stood in the doorway for a moment that was not as long as it felt. Then she sat down in the chair beside him. Neither of them said anything. The receptionist called a name that was not hers. The waiting room continued its ordinary business around them, other people sitting and waiting and looking at their phones, and she and Cael sat beside each other and did not say anything and did not need to. The appointment was 40 minutes. He was in the waiting room when she came back out, which she had not known whether he would be or not. The doctor had confirmed what she already knew, which was the practical information, and had told her what she needed to know about the next steps, and she had written down what she needed to write down and had thanked the doctor and had come back out to the waiting room, and he was there. They walked back to the office together. They did not speak for most of the walk, not because there was nothing to say, but because the walk was a walk, and both of them were people who allowed things to settle before speaking, and the walk was the settling. When they were half a block from the building, she said,
Your father was wrong about one thing.
What was he wrong about?
He thought you needed someone to be placed near you. You did not. You needed someone who would choose to be near you.
Are you choosing?
I have been choosing since month 14. I just did not say it out loud.
Say it now.
She looked at him on the street a half block from the building where she had worked for 2 years, and she said,
I am choosing to be here. For the job, and for the other thing, and for everything that comes after the other thing. All of it.
The other thing has a name.
I know. I will need time to say it.
I have time.
I know you do.
They went into the building. She held the elevator. He pressed the floor button. The elevator went up. 6 months after the walk, she was at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon managing the month's schedule, which was more complex now than it had been, but which she handled the same way she had always handled it, which was to map it completely before doing anything with it, and Cael was across the office in his own space reading a report, which was where he was on Tuesday afternoons, and the office had the quality it had developed over 6 months of the two of them being in it, which was not professional and not personal, but something that was both of those and something else, that she did not have an exact word for, and had decided she did not need an exact word for. At some point, she stood to get a file from the cabinet beside his desk, which required her to walk past his desk, and she set her hand on the edge of the desk to lean past it to the cabinet, and his hand came off the report and rested on top of hers for a moment, not pressing, not gripping, just present. And then she had the file, and she straightened, and he went back to the report, and she went back to her desk and sat down and continued working. It was not a large gesture, and it was not a small gesture. It was the gesture of a person who had learned to be present without announcement, which was the thing she had hoped for without knowing she was hoping for it, and the thing she had been given not because it had been arranged, but because both of them had decided it was what they wanted, on the same day and for their own reasons, and had kept deciding it every day since. Hết tập 230 đoạn.